We understand oil. We know we have to deal with Iraq and Iran and Venezuela and Russia. It's a supply chain that's awkward and painful sometimes, but we understand it. If you want to move to EV, you have to replace the oil supply chain system with 13 more. And we have to deal with 60 countries instead of 5. And if we lose access to any of them, the whole thing collapses. So in a deglobalized world, EVs in the way you're thinking cannot happen.
You have everything
No,
packetized
no,
and
no.
able
I
to
hear what
move.
you're saying, and assuming that the numbers work out, I can't speak to that. I haven't seen your data on that. But assuming the numbers work out, we are talking about a different sort of manufacturing system that again has co-location between population centers and where the manufacturing is actually done. In that scenario, you're talking about the number of ton freight miles being reduced by in excess of 95%. So I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong. I'm saying you can't use any of the data we have for our current distribution system to apply that to that model, because that model fundamentally obliviates the old system. Uh, do I think we're going in some version of that direction? Yeah. I would say that we're having seen a quantum leap in the move in that direction right now. Right now, Hong Kong, Shenzhen, and Shanghai are offline. We don't know when they're
Yeah.
going to come back. And this is the new normal for China because they don't have a vaccine. So anyone who hasn't already moved their manufacturing is just absolutely getting beaten about the head and shoulders right now. So what you're seeing, what you're talking about there, that transition is happening right now. Yeah, if okay, number one, small ships can't make cross-oceanic trips. They just don't have the range. Two, more importantly, as soon as commercial vessels come under fire, the global maritime insurance industry cuts coverage for those areas and no one goes into those ports. We're seeing that in the Black Sea right now. So the scenario you're talking about is a renationalization or at least a regionalization of manufacturing. I agree, we're going that direction, but there's not going to be a lot of connections between the regions. I think it's right out, but let me kind of give you some background as to why I'm thinking that. There have only been three technological revolutions in human history that have actually changed the relationship of a society to its economy and a society to its geographic positioning. Sedentary agriculture, deep water navigation, and the Industrial Revolution. The digital revolution is real. It is changing many things about how we live and how we earn income, but it is dependent upon the Industrial Revolution. It is not a fundamental quantum leap beyond it. So if you break down the energy system of oil and electricity, there's nothing in the digital space that works. And I would argue that we're going to see a great deal of deindustrialization around the world in the next 20 years. Sure, we're in the early stages of seeing this in Ukraine, which is kind of unfair considering there's a war going on, but Ukraine gets all of its energy from Russia. And we're going to see 4 to 5 million barrels a day of Russian crude go offline later this year, which means there is not enough for global consumption to continue in its current form. Even if I believed in EVs hugely, the technology isn't far enough along for it to be applied to the poorer locations of the world. So places that depend upon international trade to get the building blocks of modern society, oil, natural gas, copper, iron ore, and so on. We're entering a period of abject shortage as global trade links break down. So there are huge portions of the world, the country I am bar none most concerned about is China, that simply aren't going to have access to the materials that they need to continue in a modern industrialized lifestyle. And if you start to deindustrialize, cities are a death trap. And so you're going to see the cities in these areas to a degree empty so that people can go back to at least somewhere where they can eat. You know, I hear you. This is not the first time I've heard that argument. I just think it's wrong.
Okay, but
You got to think
why?
about why we've been able to do what we've done for the last 75 years. We've had a change in the macro strategic environment, and that's allowed access from labor or energy or finance or tech from anywhere in the world to go anywhere else. The whole world has been a single system, and the economies of scale have been massive. That's now breaking down. Now, will the changes you're identifying not happen? Not what I'm saying. I'm saying that they can't be broad based. And there will be countries, I think the US is at the top of that list, that will be able to pursue these things. And that'll allow us to then have the argument about whether they're ready for prime time or not. So baby boomers are leaving the market. That takes a lot of blue collar. That takes a lot of trucking and agriculture away. Gen Xers are a small generation with low labor participation rate. So that means labor inflation's locked in for at least the next decade. The millennials lost 3 to 5 years of expertise, either because they meet the negative stereotypes or because they entered the workforce just in time for the financial crisis and all got fired at the same time. Either way, they're the least skilled generation we've ever had. And that's where you're feeling the pressure in terms of software, because they're just not skilled enough for their age. But the next generation down, the Zoomers, they're antisocial. They were raised by Gen X. They were told that you had to be better than everyone else if you wanted to survive. Their dream job is to live in a closet coding. It's the only job they want. So at least I have some good news for you guys. Your labor concerns in that specific spot are going to go away. I'm concerned that the building blocks of what allows that coherence themselves are being challenged. And that's going to shrink the pool of places where this is relevant. So I see not just rising inequality because of more automated systems within countries. I see greater inequality between countries, between the countries that can pull this off and the ones that can't. For what it's worth, my heart is with you. I used to fully believe that, but then I've seen the way that various systems have manipulated the digital space, and I've kind of lost a lot of confidence in that. So I can see some version of that becoming stronger and maybe strengthening, for example, the ties between the United States and Mexico, where there's no functional censorship. And maybe that will include a few select European, Asian, and especially South American countries. I can see a smaller world making that work. But are you guys familiar with what went down in the digital space in the Twitter revolution in Egypt?
Yeah.
Okay, so very short version. The Mubarak dynasty were a bunch of assholes. And so when the people rose up against it, the military stood back and made sure that all the digital avenues were open. And it resulted in the Mubarak fall. 2 years later, the military was like, we don't like what's replaced it. So they cut the cables linking Egypt to the rest of the world. There were only two. And they controlled the information space. And they were able to take over very easily. About a year after that, the Russians came to Egypt to find out how it was done. So then the Russians went and put digital kill switches on the 4 cables that go in and out of Russia. That's one of the reasons the information space in Russia is so tight and so ridiculous right now. Every authoritative system in the world has done some equivalent like that. And so the degree to which you can have honest, direct, open, globalized, if you will, connections is a much smaller part of the world than you might think. And it is dependent upon governments feeling secure enough and cultures being secure enough in their identity to not limit the digital connections between them and everyone else. The technology of the moment, you have to have the receiver. So again, you have to have a system that is okay with that. So in the case of Ukraine, yeah, they're totally okay with it. And one of the most impressive technical feats I've seen in the last decade is the Europeans linking the Ukrainians up to their electricity grid in like a week and a half. That's normally like a 5-year project. That was shockingly impressive because they used to rely on the Russians for all of that. If that had not been in place, Ukraine would be in the dark right now. In general, and just to establish my bona fides here, I've got a solar system on my house. I believe in the climate change data. I'm not a skeptic on that. I'm a skeptic on the technologies that we seem to have all latched on to fix it.